The shack creaked in the wind. A lantern swung slow, painting shadows that looked alive, long, jagged things crawling along the walls. The rancher's hand trembled as it reached for the blanket. His other hand held the revolver low, barrel dark and sweating in the faint glow. His breath came rough, like he was dragging it through sand. On the cot, the woman stirred, skin pale, lips cracked from thirst and dust. Her voice scraped out, dry as grass in a dying field. "Please, don't make me say it." The words barely rose above a whisper, yet they cut through the shack like a blade. He froze. The revolver shifted in his grip. The leather of his holster groaned as though it wanted him to draw quicker, to end the waiting. But he didn't, not yet. The blanket sat heavy, draped over her face. A simple cloth, but it carried the weight of a coffin lid. His fingers gripped the edge, calloused, shaking. The fabric smelled of smoke, maybe fire, maybe worse. The room was so quiet he could hear the lantern's hiss, the faint patter of dust rolling off the roof, the pulse hammering inside his own ears. She turned her head slightly under the cover. Her voice, again, smaller this time. "You don't want to see. Nobody ever does." The rancher swallowed hard. His throat ached. He thought of coffee, the way it steadied his hands in the morning. He thought of the silence after gunfire, the ringing that never left. And he thought of the cloth, this wall between what she was and what he feared. He pulled slow. The blanket slipped inch by inch. His hand stopped halfway, hovering. A fly buzzed against the lantern glass. Outside, the wind rattled the shack door like a restless spirit. The revolver's barrel gleamed, pointed down but ready. His finger twitched. The woman let out a sound that wasn't quite a sob, not quite a laugh. It was broken. It was tired. "Please," she whispered again. "Don't leave." Oak. He should have walked away, left her there in shadow. But the rancher knew there were things a man couldn't outrun, no matter how far the desert stretched, and so he pulled the cloth the rest of the way. The lantern flickered hard, like even the flame didn't want to witness what was underneath. And then, silence. Only his shadow quivering against the wall, his chest rising sharp and shallow. The revolver slipped a fraction in his grip, his knuckles whitened, his jaw clenched. What he saw beneath that blanket froze him solid. The shack seemed to close in, the lantern light shrinking to a thin circle, the night pressing at the windows. He didn't speak. Couldn't. The cloth fell from his fingers, slow, drifting like a dead leaf through stale air. It landed on the floorboards with a soft sigh, and the woman turned her face away, as if the world had ended long before this moment. The lantern hissed again. The silence deepened. And somewhere, beyond the shack, a coyote cried into the dusk. Fade to black. The revolver sat on the table, unmoving, heavy, a shadow that did not belong to either of them, yet it ruled the room like a silent judge. He set the pitcher down beside it, water sloshing soft against tin. His hands shook as he poured, more than he wished her to see. The cup clinked against the table. The woman's eyes flickered toward it, but never met his. Her hands tightened around the blanket, thin fingers curled white, clutching it as though it were the last rope keeping her from the dark. "Drink," he said, voice rough, worn down like gravel under boots. She didn't move, not at first. Her lips parted, then closed again. She kept her face turned away where the lantern light couldn't reach. The wind pressed against the shack, making the boards groan. Somewhere outside, a branch scraped the roof like nails. Finally, she reached, slow, guarded. She cradled the cup close, her hands trembling worse than his had. The water touched her lips, and for a moment he thought she might break apart. She drank with the sound of someone starved, desperate, but she tried to hide it behind silence. The rancher watched, not the drinking, not her throat working, but the blanket, the way it slipped just enough to show the fragile line of her jaw. A glimpse, nothing more. He shifted in his chair. Leather squeaked. His revolver stayed where it was, but its presence pressed against them both. "You ain't gonna ask?" she rasped. Her voice cracked halfway, more ghost than breath. He didn't answer, just rubbed a thumb over his knuckle, slow, as if polishing a memory he didn't want. Her eyes darted toward him then, quick and sharp, testing, accusing. But the moment he looked back, she dropped them again. Her silence weighed more than her words. The cup emptied. She held it in both hands like it might shatter if she let go. The blanket never loosened. If anything, she pulled it higher, until only the shadow of her mouth remained visible. It was more than fabric now. It was armor, confession, and grave all in one. The rancher leaned back, the chair creaking under him. He stared at the revolver. Didn't touch it. Didn't need to. The gun spoke loud enough without a hand to guide it. Another silence. Long, heavy. The kind where a man feels every scar inside him rise up to the surface. She broke it, her voice barely a whisper. Men always want the same thing. He closed his eyes. The words dragged something across his chest, old and ugly. He thought of nights around campfires, faces he could no longer name, the way the desert swallows up the weak. I ain't every man, he said finally, her. Fingers twitched around the cup. She almost laughed. Almost. But the sound died in her throat before it could take shape. The wind shoved harder at the shack. Boards rattled. The lantern flame wavered, stretching their shadows across the wall. His wide and restless, hers small but unbroken, both trapped in the same flicker. He stood, slowly, his boots pressed dust into the floor with each step. He reached for the cup. She let him take it, but her grip lingered just long enough to make the air between them ache. The blanket stayed, the gun stayed, and between them, only the sound of his boots pacing, her breath shallow, and the lantern burning low. He set the cup down, empty, beside the revolver. Two objects on a table, one meant for living, one for dying. Neither of them touched either. The shack held its breath. And the rancher, his eyes fixed on the cloth she clutched, knew the night had only just begun. Fade. The first sound was the hooves, low, distant, like thunder rolling across dry earth. The rancher's head snapped up. His hand brushed the revolver without thought. The woman felt it too. Her shoulders stiffened under the blanket. Her breath caught sharp in her throat. Then came the lantern. It sputtered once, then went black, smothering the room in sudden dark. Only moonlight seeped through the cracks in the wood, pale and thin. Shadows lengthened, bent, and crawled across the shack floor. The hooves grew louder, closer. The ground shook beneath each strike until the shack itself seemed to tremble. The woman gripped the blanket tighter, her thin fingers twisting the cloth like rope. Her whisper broke the silence. They found me. Outside, horses snorted, stamping dust. Men laughed, hard, cutting laughter that didn't belong to joy, only cruelty. The rancher stood still, every muscle locked. His revolver was inches away. His hand hovered but shook. Sweat slid down his temple, cold as rainwater. The laughter died. A voice rose up, rough as barbed wire. We're looking for a woman. Ran through these parts. Ain't seen her, have you? Boots hit dirt. Shadows shifted at the door, long rifle barrels gleaming silver in the moonlight. The woman pressed back against the wall, eyes wide, face still hidden beneath the blanket. She mouthed the words without sound at first, then forced them out. If they see me, I'm already dead. Her whisper hung in the air like smoke. The rancher's jaw tightened. His silence was louder than words. Another laugh outside. Another voice, younger, sharper. Check the shack. She could be hiding in there. The rancher's throat closed. He didn't move. Couldn't. The woman turned toward him then. Her eyes, wet in the dark, burned with something desperate, something beyond fear. She didn't beg with words. She begged with silence, with the way her body curled small, with the way her hands clung to that blanket as if it were a shroud. But finally, her whisper came, torn and trembling. Please, don't give me up. The shack walls groaned under the weight of the night. Boots scraped outside. Someone spat. Someone else rattled the latch of the door. The revolver lay within reach. Its black steel caught the moonlight. It promised one choice, one end, as it always had. The rancher's hand lowered toward it, slow, unsteady. He could feel the memory of every trigger he had ever pulled pressing against his skin. The silence stretched so thin it could snap. The woman's breath quickened. You don't understand, she hissed, so low it was almost air. If they take me, it won't matter if I'm alive or not. Don't let them. Outside, hooves shuffled. Spurs jingled. A boot hit the shack wall with a dull thud. The rancher's shadow swayed across the boards, tall, shaking. His hand hovered over the revolver. Moonlight carved the moment into stone. He could open the door and hand her over, buy himself peace, maybe even thanks. Or he could lie, keep her hidden, and drag death inside with them. The laughter outside grew again, sharp, echoing through the desert air. The riders weren't in a hurry. They had time. They knew fear fermented best in silence. The woman leaned close, voice raw as rust. You hold my life in your hand. Do you even know what that means? The rancher didn't answer, couldn't. He stared at the revolver, at her, at the door, where shadows pooled like blood. The riders waited, and the shack itself seemed to listen. Every nail, every board, the whole fragile thing straining to hear the choice he would make. He drew a breath, long, slow, ragged. The revolver stayed on the table. For now. The laughter outside faded into whispers. Hooves shifted again. Shadows stretched thin across the floor. The night pressed harder against the shack. The woman closed her eyes. The rancher lowered his hand. And in that silence, he knew the storm wasn't outside anymore. It was already in the room. The shack rattled with laughter outside. Boots scraped, rifles clicked. Death waited at the door, patient as a wolf. Inside, the rancher stood frozen, his hand hovering near the revolver. His breath came sharp, each inhale dragging like barbed wire through his chest. The woman trembled beneath the blanket, her body curled inward, as though the cloth alone could shield her from every set of eyes beyond those walls. The rancher couldn't bear it anymore. The silence, the waiting, the weight of not knowing. His hand snapped forward. He seized the edge of the blanket and tore it away. The fabric dropped to the floor with a whisper, dust lifting like smoke. The lantern flickered back to life in a sudden breath of wind, spilling its pale glow over her face. And what he saw cut him deeper than any bullet. Her face was ruined, scarred, broken, brutalized. The kind of cruelty that didn't come from accident or fate, but from men, from hands that had carved pain into her as though it were their right. But her eyes still burned, alive, unbroken, holding a fire the rest of her body could no longer carry. The revolver slipped from his hand. It didn't fall soft. It struck the wooden floor with a crack like thunder, echoing through the shack, louder than the riders outside, louder than his own heartbeat. The sound silenced everything. The woman flinched at first, then turned her gaze on him. She saw the horror in his eyes, the pity, the shame. Her voice came broken, raw, but steady enough to cut through him. "Now you know why they hunt me. Please, don't make me say it." The words trembled in the air like a confession, but they weren't an explanation. They were a wound, left open between them. The rancher's chest tightened. His throat burned. He wanted to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Not here, not with her eyes locked on his. He looked at the revolver on the floor. Its barrel pointed nowhere, its shadow bent against the boards. A weapon that had always meant one thing: vengeance. Now it lay useless, small, powerless in the face of what he'd seen. The woman pulled the blanket back to her chin, slower this time, but not to hide. No, this was armor now, not against him, but against the world that had made her beg for silence. Outside, the riders shifted, growing restless. A voyage. Sea called, sharp and impatient. "Anyone in there?" The rancher didn't move, didn't answer. His hands curled into fists, not at her, not at himself, but at the storm pressing in from every direction, inside and out. The revolver lay between them, one choice, one weight, and yet, for the first time in years, he felt the gun had no say in what came next. The woman's eyes glistened in the lantern glow, not with tears, but with defiance. A light that no scar had managed to kill. He held that gaze, and in it, he saw not just her ruin. He saw his own. The shack stood in silence, holding its breath. And the old boards knew nothing would ever be the same again. Fade. The shack smelled of smoke and gunpowder. The table wore new scars, dark holes punched clean through the wood, edges splintered like broken teeth. The revolver lay among them, cold, forgotten, its shadow long, stretching thin under the first reach of morning light. The riders were gone. Whether they'd scattered or bled into the dust outside, no one said, no one needed to. The night had passed, and it had taken something with it. The rancher moved slow, every joint stiff from silence and fear. His boots crunched over shards of glass, over bullet casings that gleamed dull in the pale sun. She still sat where she had, shoulders curled, eyes closed. The blanket rested in her lap like a truce. He bent, picked it up, and laid it over her again. Not to hide, not this time, just to keep her warm. Her hands clutched it softly, without trembling. She didn't lift her eyes, she didn't speak, and he didn't ask, not her name, not her past, not what she carried in her scars. The shack breathed with them, wood creaking in the new light, dust rising slow, turning gold as the sun cut through the cracks. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was alive. It was survival. The rancher sat back in his chair. He looked at the revolver one last time, lying among the scars on the table. Then he turned from it, as if a man could finally leave part of himself behind. The wind whispered through the broken slats. The world outside waited. He spoke once, quiet, like gravel in his throat. Some scars ain't meant to heal, but sometimes you can still keep 'em safe. No answer came. Only the sun climbing higher, dust dancing in its light like gold caught between two souls who would carry this silence into the day fade.